Hey y'all, and welcome to another episode of the Muddling Through podcast. Today's guest is my friend Michael Corkery. Mike's an English teacher, an avid reader, and collector of books. And in this episode we talk some literature, delve into philosophy and religion, and round things off by discussing the role that community plays in people's lives. I hope you all enjoy. So thanks for coming on the show, Mike.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So you just got engaged.
I did.
Yeah. How long have you guys been together?
It's about 3 years, actually right this July.
Really? All right.
So yeah, about 3 years.
How'd you guys meet?
We met through a friend named Jenna over in Dover. She worked for my roommate, and I was on the dating scene and connected with Bella.
Right on. Yeah, no, it seems like it's working out for you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was over at your house the other day, and you have a fairly extensive book collection.
I do. Yeah. Some say too extensive. Anybody that's ever helped me move says too extensive.
Right. Yeah, I know how that is.
Yeah. It amounts to I think 50, 60 boxes solid of books. And,
yeah.
I haven't moved in a couple of years, so it's been, I'm regaining the patience of those I love. But.
Are you reading anything now?
Yeah, I'm actually reading, last week I started the book Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon. So it's a doozy. They call it an encyclopedic novel.
Okay, all right.
So it takes a little extra work to make sense of it.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a particular type of book that you like to read? Something that you lean towards? Lately,
so in general, I just I tend to like writers that are more on the fringe of things. So in the past, I've been really into the beat movement from the 50s and 60s, like Jack Kerouac and novelists and poets like that. But more recently, I've been reading more of, avant-garde writers or writers that mess with the art of writing a little bit. So I've been really challenging myself. I read Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace, which is another one of those where they call it encyclopedic novels, but you have to look a lot of stuff up. In that book, a lot of made up stuff that you have to it's got endnotes at the end of the book that you have to constantly flip to make sense of different things, like different prescription drugs he's made up and stuff like that. So it's really challenging, but as an English teacher, I try to brush up on different forms of writing, which is why I've been focusing on that.
Yeah, no, for sure. How long have you been an English teacher?
So this past year, I worked as a special ed teacher, but I've been working up until that point, I worked as an English teacher for 4 or 5 years. Worked as a paraprofessional, which is an assistant teacher for special ed, which got me into special ed. But my passion is definitely always with English literature, and I'm always, even though I'm teaching middle school special ed right now, staying brushed up.
Did you have an age category that you used to teach English in, or
high school? Yeah, so my original teaching certificate and focus was on high school English, just the as it was the classics, The Great Gatsby and stuff like that, which I really like teaching. But times are changing, which is part of why I'm working with the younger grades now, trying to make sure they stay off heroin and stuff. That's
apparently a challenge.
Yeah, as awful as that sounds, that's been a challenge here in New Hampshire, and you got to get them young to keep them off that kind of stuff.
What's teaching like for you?
God, it's the most rewarding and most frustrating thing I've ever done, and I really mean that. I have issues maybe, separating work from my regular life, but I really mean it when I say I put my full heart into it. So, I teach in Farmington, New Hampshire right now. There's a lot of need there. The opioid crisis here in New Hampshire has hit that town hard enough. So, you've got a lot of kids with difficult situations that I've never had to deal with. So I think the number one thing when people ask me about teaching is I've learned so much more than even if I were trying to be humble. 5 years ago. I've learned a lot from the people I teach in terms of, just what life can really be like. And it's really changed my views and informed my views in terms of, how rough certain things can be or how good certain things can be. So, honestly, getting to meet the full range of people and what life is like for them is really, I think, informed how I think of the world. So, that's my number one thing with teaching, but I love showing up every day. I couldn't imagine the idea of doing something else kind of scares me sometimes, if I ever think about it, because I just love coming in and seeing people and just being there for kids in any way they need. And just, it feels meaningful to me.
Yeah.
It's the right thing for my personality.
Right. So you've kind of, did you ever anticipate when you decided to get like a teaching degree that it would be like a significant portion of it would be like a mentoring kind of thing?
If I'm being honest, I started when I started out college over at the University of New Hampshire. I was a business major with a focus on marketing. When I was finishing up high school, I was just really interested I was in a punk band, and so ironically with that, I ended up in business school. But I really liked the creative side of things. So I was focusing on advertisement and entrepreneurship. And, when I started college, I really wanted to get more of a focus on owning my own venue or, something along those lines. So I really wanted to, I didn't realize it at the time, but really what I wanted was to create a place for kids to come and let off some steam and, in a healthy way and feel like their voices were heard. And I just became really disillusioned while I was in business school. It wasn't, I kind of knew it wasn't my thing entering, but the more I did it, the more I was just like, I could be good at this, but I don't want to spend my life doing it. And I was an English minor during that time. And all of a sudden it just I had this great existential crisis where I was sitting down with a friend one-on-one, and he said, well, if you like English, why don't you do that? And I said, well, I don't see myself being a novelist or anything, at least at that time. And he said, well, you've been tutoring kids in math, or other fellow students, for, whatever they offered you for it. If you could do that, why couldn't you be a teacher? Never thought of it before. And that was the beginning of it. So, in terms of picturing myself here, or seeing myself being a mentor, I never saw any of that. I wanted to, honestly, I was halfway through college. I went up to my parents and I said, Mom, Dad, I don't know what I want to do. So I want to quit school and be homeless in New York City. I wanted to join up with this band that smoked a lot of crack. I didn't necessarily want to smoke crack, but they had a nice place to squat. It would have been a disaster. I didn't really know anything about the world then, as old as I was. And, at 20, I thought I knew everything. And
sure.
Plenty of 20-year-olds do, but I didn't. And thank God my dad stopped me. And instead of becoming homeless, I decided to get a degree in teaching. And here I am. But I like to think it was for the same reasons. I think the reason I entered teaching is the exact reason that I wanted to open a music club for, with a focus on rock music. And then the same reason I wanted to go down to the city and pursue, playing in a punk band. I always wanted to do something that I felt was meaningful. And, teaching kind of found me in the healthiest place for that.
Right. Yeah, I guess people's search for meaning is like, it can be a challenge,
Yeah.
And if it's not meaningful, it can be difficult to like go forward on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think some kids they go to New Zealand and look at waterfalls to find themselves. And unfortunately, my route was like, Mom, I've never put a needle in my arm. What if I went down to New York City and tried that? Yeah. Luckily, I have really open-minded parents that even listened to me, but they were they kept me they found a way to convince me to go in a positive direction. But, I think that's every kid at that age, that I was at that time, 20, 18 to 21, just trying to figure out. I mean, heck, there's still days I think about, what is the meaning of life, and am I doing what I think it is? But, yeah, I think, I found the best answer for myself there, and luckily things fell into place that, I mean, it could have gone a different route. That's for sure.
Could have gone off the rails real quick.
Yeah, for better or worse. Probably for worse.
So you play like an instrument?
Yeah, less so lately. I've sung and played guitar in bands. I tend to be more of a writer than a musician. So, definitely the thing that's helped me up with music is the fact that I'm not as musically inclined. I love music and I love writing words, but I've always needed somebody to be the music writer. So I've had a couple host bodies I've leached onto over the years that have written me some phenomenal music. So I've been in some bands that have come out with some music, but I'm always looking for the next person that wants to abandon their life for me.
Oh, sure.
I'm just kidding.
I mean, somebody's got to write.
Yeah. Right? I mean, if somebody finds value in the lyrics, I guess, or something.
It's interesting talking about meaning. Are you familiar with Jordan Peterson?
Yes, the filmmaker or the comedian. Wait, no. Backing up. That's Jordan Peele. Jordan Peterson. He's is he from Canada?
He is.
He is. Yes. It's funny you say that. I'm not 100% familiar with him, but I do run a little like online T-shirt company through Etsy, and I recently just had somebody email me asking to do. I do the faces of prolific or just meaningful writers, and that was one that was brought up to me. That sort of the person, if nothing else, suggesting like, hey, be familiar with this person. Mm-hmm. What were we going to say about Jordan Peterson?
Oh, so he talks a lot about meaning. And like being able to like discover, like he doesn't believe in the concept of creating meaning for yourself, but discovering the meaning, like what's meaningful to you.
Okay.
And so his sort of philosophy, and he takes a lot from like he's a clinical psychologist.
Yep.
And like a professor at like a bunch of different universities. He's doing like lecture tours at the moment.
Oh, okay. That might be why I'm wondering. Yeah, it's funny. The name comes up twice in my life in such a short time span.
So he wrote a couple books, Maps of Meaning and then 12 Rules for Life.
Oh, okay.
And so his basic like premise about meaning is, life is suffering.
Yep.
Or it's marked by suffering.
Sure.
And to make it like to be able to move forward, you have to accept that and like carry that burden yourself. And to have the most meaningful life, you have to take on the most responsibility that you can manage.
Okay.
And carrying that burden. So like it's not about like happiness, right?
Sure. Sure.
It's about carrying a load. And doing it well.
Yep.
But he's a big proponent of like the Russian writers. And like the psychologist, like the German psychologist or whatever.
Okay.
And I somewhere along
some like the nihilists from like Russia, or like Dostoevsky, or
would he be considered a nihilist?
People do consider him like an early nihilist, but just in the sense of it's fatalistic. I mean, there's Russia at that time too was
a rough place
for sure. I mean, Tsarist Russia was not a I'm saying Tsarist Russia has never been an easy place to live, no matter what, if for no other reason than the climate. Was it those sort of writers though he's speaking to that he?
Dostoevsky, Tolstoy.
Okay. Yep.
And
Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah.
Solzhenitsyn. Yep.
And Nietzsche and Jung and Freud.
Okay. And those, those boys. You're talking about writers from throughout the century, or throughout 2 centuries, if that. So that there's definitely a connecting thread there.
Yeah. I personally haven't dipped too deeply into those writers. Like they're on my list. Kind of slowly working my way through my backlog.
Yeah, but that takes a while. I understand.
Are those writers that you've really looked at?
I've always I read Crime and Punishment in high school by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and he that book definitely at the time I didn't get it to the point that I've reflected on at this point. I haven't read it again, honestly, just because there's, as we've just discussed, there's so many books out there, and
way too many books.
Yeah, I feel like when I've got such a backlog, it's very difficult to go back and tackle a 600-page book.
Yeah.
But
by a Russian novelist.
By a Russian novelist, yeah. But I remember the book really well, and I was only 17 when I read it. And then, so that spoke to me right off the bat, and I became even more fascinated with Russian culture as time went on, especially related to the October Revolution of 1917 and the USSR and the fall of the USSR and just all the political inworkings of that time period really, what people don't talk about a lot is the whole world was sort of on the brink of a socialist revolution, and Russia's the one that played it out, for worse as it played out. But as a sort of amateur social scientist or whatever you want to say, I love reading about that, all the different ideas that were going on at the time, and it's really representative of any time politically, maybe even now with a lot going on. I think a lot of people are certain that something's got to change, but they don't know where to go with it. That's 1917 in Russia. But in terms of those philosophers, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, or Good and Evil by Nietzsche, I read those. He's definitely I don't subscribe to everything he's written.
No.
I think that just to get through my daily life, and I admit maybe there's some leaps of faith here, but philosophically, but I think that just to get through daily life, there's got to be some meaning. So I'm definitely going to go with something closer to where Jordan Peterson landed, or Jean-Paul Sartre, or something where either you go with the late existentialist thinking that we create meaning, and you either just sort of subscribe to that and take it for what it is, or what you were just saying with Jordan Peterson, where sort of there is meaning out there. It's not universal, but you find it. I think it's important. I think it's extremely difficult to wake up every morning and do something with your day unless you've got some sense. And, if I'm speaking of my own philosophy, I'm aware that half the time I get up and I know I'm full of crap, but, or I might be, I accept that, my truth isn't necessarily universal, and that my meaning for life might be, if I don't believe in an afterlife or something, then, that you're just being good to be good. And, it's very complicated there. But in terms of those thinkers, I definitely, I think, subscribe to maybe their view of the world, but the end game, I've kind of maybe intellectualized over time that, regardless of any concrete meaning or a presence of God or, a divine direction, I think that no matter what, I've resolved to, make my time on earth something that seems meaningful to me in the moment. So almost somewhere in between the existentialists and, what Jordan Peterson's talking about, I definitely think that I've made my meaning and I know why I get up, and, whether or not I've discovered that meaning and that manifests as something that's like concrete, universal by the time I die, or if anybody recognizes it as such. But I guess part of me just resigns to the fact that there's no right answer that we know for sure until, if all guarantees are true, I'll figure it out when I'm dead. And, I am walking through the pearly gates or ending up in hell, and I'm answering to those things. But for now, not being sure, I've just kind of resolved to take a meaning that makes sense to me, and it's resolved in good. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, I was raised Catholic, so there's certainly a strict ethics system in that, and that's influenced me. But I'm at a point where spinning away from some of those authors and looking at even just Jesus Christ as almost a literary figure. I've never found the need to argue with people as to whether or not he's a literary figure of value or a historical figure of value. I've looked at my own ethics system, and it seems to be consistent with a lot of the stuff that is preached there.
Yeah.
So I think that, through my own personal reading and literary studies in college and just what I read in high school, coupled with that going to church every Sunday and, being Irish Catholic, I think it's kind of landed me in this, trying to search for meaning, but recognizing other people search for meaning too. And, not, as long as you kind of land on the same page that, you're not running around murdering people or, specifically causing trouble, that, we can get along.
Sure. Do you think that...
Sorry if that just got real serious.
That's excellent. That's kind of where the podcast goes a lot of the time.
Okay.
I had a conversation with my good friend Dave.
Okay.
He was on here, and we were talking about the church and its kind of its role in things.
Yeah.
So, what was it like growing up Catholic?
I've definitely got some interesting stories. I mean, I don't think it's stereotypical. I mean, this is all true. I don't have any hard feelings per se at all. But I know a lot of I'm not unique in that upbringing per se, and I'm certainly not unique in being a kid of the quote unquote millennial generation that was raised under a certain religion that didn't necessarily stay prescribed strictly to that religion. But I was an altar boy as a kid. If for those that don't know what that means, it's just like a priest helper during the church service. So my brother and I literally served every week. We'd be on the altar, or, on the stage, if you will, with the priest and just doing those things. So I was definitely involved, and that was when I was a kid in New Jersey. I think that I definitely found church boring like any kid, but I think that's a kid thing. I think, I landed in a place that's different even from my siblings, in that, I didn't stop going to every Sunday mass or anything like that because I was bored and because I was like, well, I could go play baseball today or something. There were those factors certainly as a teenager, but I think I definitely had sort of philosophical disagreements that made me kind of go another direction. The big one being, the big one being, I when I first moved up to New Hampshire, I was asked by my mom and my brother to be a confirmation sponsor for my brother, which just meant, different sex. That's SECTS. This is not a dirty podcast.
Get your mind out of it.
Different, subgenres of Christianity, if you will. Do it differently, but in the Catholic Church, actually even the Catholic Church does it a little differently. Yeah. Growing up in New Jersey, I did it in 8th grade, 14. But up here in New Hampshire, they did it in 10th grade at about 15 or 16. So my brother asked me if I would be his confirmation sponsor, which... to anybody that didn't grow up, in Christianity or the Catholic Church, is just sort of a person that commits to confirming that this person is going to be an adult Christian, or Catholic specifically, and carry the virtues of the church, if you will. And it's basically that. It's welcoming the child into adulthood in the church. and whatever responsibilities might come with that. And it's one of the sacraments or the ceremonies, if you will, of being a Catholic. That included with baptism, first communion, and then obviously confirmation, marriage, and then final last rites. Deathbed words from a priest. So it's a major event, and I agreed to be a sponsor, even though I was already having some philosophical differences with the church over time, and feeling like I could find more direct connections, both philosophically and spiritually, to the messages that I was hearing in church. And this really put me over the edge. We had a little practice where we all we lined up. It was a rehearsal, like a rehearsal dinner for a wedding or something. And I got up to the front, and at the time I was a freshman in college, and I was sporting a mohawk haircut.
I'm sure that went over well.
Yeah, so it was when it was spiked up, it was a good like 7 inches or so. So it was fairly large, but I had kept it down out of respect for the church and everything that night. So it looked like, honestly, the best description I can give over the air with no video is, if you can imagine, like killing a squirrel and then plopping it on top of your head. If you shaved your head and then took a squirrel carcass. It was that. The way my hair falls, it just flopped to either side. Yeah. So whatever. So I walked up to the front, going through the motions, and it wasn't an actual priest. He was sort of a authoritarian, like maybe bureaucratic figure in the church, but he made a comment on how Jesus wouldn't approve of my hair, something along those lines. Okay. And it was also into a microphone in front of the entire church, the entire grade level, if you will, of those kids in their Christian schooling. So I wasn't so much embarrassed that I couldn't handle it, but I'll admit it, the emotion was anger at the time that somebody could represent the church in some way and say something so ignorant, I guess, as that, that Jesus or God or anybody would care about my hairdo. Not who I was. So, that was, I think, I've gone back for Christmas or Easter sometimes, masses, honestly, because it's very meaningful to my parents, and I have a lot of respect for my parents. Yeah. In particular, it's very important to my dad, whose father came over from Ireland. Catholicism is very, very deeply ingrained there, and I respect that a lot. And I don't have any hard feelings towards anyone, especially my parents on that. But it was something that I dealt with philosophically, and I said, this is ridiculous. That's not what I heard all those years. Yeah. So it felt like time to sort of explore things my own way, and that was kind of similar timing to starting college and expanding my reading and really trying to, honestly, punk rock was my outlet for finding some of that, but listening to songs and like any authors they mentioned or ideas they mentioned, I'd start looking them up.
Yeah. Sort of going down the rabbit hole, as it were.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, far down the rabbit hole. I don't know if I've even come halfway out yet. 10, 20 years later.
Yeah. No, definitely. As you can probably imagine, I grew up in a church setting myself.
Sure, absolutely.
And have my own sort of various hang-ups about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's some strange, like, inconsistencies, not necessarily in, like, discoverable doctrine, but in the way that, like, the traditions kind of lay themselves out.
Mm-hmm. I think we're on the same page there.
This isn't, I don't see this being biblical.
Right.
But, like, it's still, how we do things. So I don't know if there's a way out for churches without, like if you're going to start throwing stuff out, you want to make sure that you're not throwing out the good stuff.
Yeah.
And like keeping it, whole, but also like it's anytime that you're gonna try to like cut things out or purify stuff, it's gonna be kind of a messy.
Oh, it's definitely messy. I mean, it's like, and I think that's the stepping back from the whole thing. I think I've reasoned with my whole perspective sort of through studying literature in college and everything, because you sit in the classroom and we read a book, and 20 kids in a classroom, and you could easily have 10, 12, 15 different interpretations of the same exact thing. So, I mean, through that, I just started to say, well, why not this too? And, it becomes a lot hairier, obviously, because you start talking about the Word of God here. But then you also start talking about the fact that the Bible is written by men who, heard the Word of God. So, it's an incredibly complicated thing in our human history, I think,
and compiled by committee. Or the course of a couple thousand years.
I mean, it's the world's greatest anthology, and there's not. I don't say that disrespectfully at all.
Like when if you look at the Bible as like a piece of literature, it's as consistent as you could possibly want something of that length to be.
Oh God, yeah. Oh God, I used the Lord's name there. Oh, what a mess. But but. Oh gosh. No, absolutely. I mean, it's one of it's the number one selling written text of all time. I mean, that makes sense. With the proliferation, how many countries are Christian, but, I mean, it's no wonder that it can be interpreted in so many different ways, the same words, and it's been around for so long. We have books that were written 10 years ago that people will bloody each other up over. And, here's a book that was written, as far as we're concerned, almost at the beginning of time, human history. And we've been, as a species, at least a good portion of us have been living our lives by this that long. No matter how religious or unreligious you are, this is a really important text.
It's a bedrock
to consider. Yeah. So, it's incredibly complicated, but I think through that philosophy, I just started to look at, different Christians like, I don't know if you're familiar with Shane Claiborne. He's out of Philly. My fiance, we just spoke about her, but Bella Biggis had introduced me to him, but he's I'm not 100% sure if he's a certain denomination of Christianity, but he's written several books on just like red letter Christianity, or the focusing on the words of Jesus and not necessarily the other stuff. He's
I get.
He's into the quotes.
So
focusing on the quotes from Jesus and not necessarily the other written stuff.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but for those that don't know, red letter refers to a lot of biblical texts will have like when Jesus is speaking, it'll be in red.
Correct. Sorry. Yeah. No, absolutely.
I'd kind of forgotten about that.
Yeah. That's not all Bibles, but that is what he's referring to there. That some Bibles, especially certain denominations of Christianity, will sort of highlight the words of Jesus in red as, again, not to be so sacrilegious as to keep backing it up to English literature study, but, it's like the quotes you'd pull for a paper in your high school English class. That's when it's like, heads up, this is Jesus talking.
Yeah.
Just an interesting way of looking at it. It's an interesting way of looking at any piece of writing at all is, what's the person themselves speaking versus somebody speaking for them. And no matter how much we think we're saying what that person meant, you don't know. So, how easy is it to misconstrue somebody's teachings over the course of several thousand years?
Right. Including like the context of the situation and the translation, and then cultural context.
Yeah, all the history that's interpreted that text. I mean, nothing's been added to it in 2,000 years. So, roughly. So,
but we're in a completely different place now. So what it meant to them at the time would be different from what it means means to us now.
Yeah,
If
or at least worth a discussion, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I definitely think there's some universal truth in there, or at least universal considerations, about kindness and caring for the poor and stuff like that. But it does interest me how there are, there are certain punk artists, this is just coming off of my own interest, that have drawn on those parallels that, aren't necessarily Christians by any means, with the background that maybe even I had with, direct family connection to the church. But they've drawn those parallels between, socialist writings and the Bible, and how, if for no other reason than being fascinating or interesting, some of the people that will, this is kind of going off a Woody Guthrie lyric, even not necessarily the rudest, punkest guy out there, but, he made a reference in one of his songs, literally titled Jesus Christ, about modern day New York City, and the same guy that wears the cross pendant, the gold chain with the cross hanging off of it, is that a lot of times those are the guys with, nice watches that say, forget the poor. And, the lyric from what he got there is, if Jesus preached today the way he preached in Galilee, they put Jesus Christ in his grave. That idea of, what would the modern capitalist or the modern businessman think of somebody walking around dirty with sandals, and that part of that dress code is the time, but getting together with the fringes of society and saying, you have a place on this earth. That's a wildly controversial idea that is accepted at face value by a lot of people that go to church every Sunday, but couldn't be even the slightest bother to live their lives that way. It's just, it's a sort of fascinating parallel that, some of the people that I've met that preach atheism the hardest, and that's not me preaching atheism by any means, but I've definitely met some people that have phenomenal hearts that are a lot closer to that meaning as I've interpreted it than, some of the people that put on a nice suit and hit church every Sunday. It's spun up a lot for me.
Right. Yeah, that's something really interesting about, like, how there are some pretty prominent atheists. Sam Harris is one that comes to mind.
Yeah, I have a few of his books.
And how, he doesn't believe that, like, he believes that we can come to, like, goodness through meaning.
Yeah.
Sorry. We can come to meaning through reason.
Okay.
And Jordan Peterson, like, they've had some debates, right? And Jordan Peterson's like, well, like, you got to the same place from a different avenue,
absolutely.
But, like, you still started with the foundation of, like, the Judeo-Christian, like,
absolutely,
scenario that, like, you claim that you came to these things independently, but you already started with them to begin with.
That's definitely a fascinating idea.
But the interesting thing is, like, as someone who, like, doesn't believe that there's a God, and like, that religion is like a crutch and a superstition that we should discard, out of hand. It's interesting how passionate Sam Harris and other atheists are about, like, the need to treat, like, it's interesting that without a external, like, ethical imperative, they're still adamant that people need to be treated as sovereign individuals, which you wouldn't think would be the case. You'd think that, in atheism there would be some sort of nihilism, right?
Yeah, like, if there's no God dictating the pleasant outcome of heaven if you're good, or the unpleasant outcome, way undermining how unpleasant, but certainly. The concept of heaven and hell, then why be good? It's the classic, if the teacher doesn't make rules in the classroom, then why behave for any inherent good or intrinsic good? And having not maybe read those specific texts, I'm definitely familiar with, those sort of atheists and with that Christopher Hitchens or, something like that. Some of the most passionate atheists do preach that. I think it goes back to some of what I was saying where, and this isn't necessarily not being 100% familiar with everything they've said.
Yeah.
My thoughts are, potentially, what I've been thinking, which is also that in the absence of meaning, there is only nihilism. There is only self-destruction. There's no meaning. And no matter how out there you want to get with philosophy in terms of metaphysics and are we really here and all that, I keep waking up. I can't keep feeling like I'm here for now. And
so it's almost not useful to entertain those ideas because it doesn't have a bearing.
Well, I don't find it useful because I find I find a much greater feeling myself. And this is off of, I'm the first to admit this is off gut feelings, but I feel a much greater purpose and a much greater sense when I am, excuse the way I word this, but pleasing other people or just, working towards something that helps others. That's why I'm teaching. And that's not to say teaching is the only way to do that by any means, but I've definitely struggled with that concept all the time of, what is meaningful. And I think that helping each other out is best case scenario in my mind. So I take that vision of heaven and I maybe draw off the parallel of like the second coming of Jesus and heaven on earth. But what is heaven on earth? And I try to strive for that every day in the way I behave myself. And that's not to say that any human being is capable of anything close to perfection or even good behavior all the time by any means. But the general trajectory of my life, I tend to focus on, how can I do something that helps others? How can I empathize better with others? Because, I've definitely, I think, revealed some of my thoughts through all these views, certainly with a focus on Christianity by chance, but, that's the way conversations go. But yeah, I think that, I definitely resonate with that nihilism is painful. You read those texts and, it's not good.
There's no joy there.
Yeah. So I think at some point, like in late high school, I resolved that like, okay, that makes a lot of sense to me, but I gotta be here. I gotta wake up. So I can wake up every day and, drink myself to sleep and, do something like that, saying the world means nothing. There's no God. I'm just molecules that will eventually become, a part of something different. It doesn't matter what I do. And, even somebody as well known as Martin Luther King Jr., when you back up, let's say, and look at all of the thousands of years of human history, did that really matter? And I mean, you can go into a dark, dark, dark place. And I've read those philosophical texts and then I found other ones that said, yeah, okay, but, there could be hope in this. And I think it was Albert Camus, the French existentialist, that it might have been him or Jean-Paul Sartre, but one of them had said, there's three different ways to deal with the existentialist crisis. There's blind acceptance. There's suicide. I'm sorry. There's sort of religion, blind, just suicide, like saying there's no purpose to life, so I'm just going to end it now. Or there's sort of creating your own meaning. And that's going back to, I think, where we started this whole thing. Yeah. Whether you feel like that meaning is somehow set out there for you ahead of time and it's there for you to find individually, or if it's something that you have to create for yourself. I kind of fell on the side of resigning myself to creating something that made the most sense to me. And the amazing thing, at least in my mind, is as I kept doing that and maybe it is rooted in exactly what you're talking about. I was raised in a Judeo-Christian society by all means. Right on, I mean, every Sunday I was going to a Catholic mass, so there's no denying that. But I found vast parallels between reading all of these different books and then kind of still falling back on a lot of the stuff that those core ethic values or those ethics values of, how there's nothing that, a Catholic and I should disagree on fundamentally. And that's what's kind of funny to me, with the exception of those views that fall outside of, that fall more into the dictation of man through interpretation rather than just, more literal interpretation of the quote unquote good life.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, it's really interesting to think about. There's something I was going to ask.
I just hope when I die, I made the right decision. That's the gamble. That's the toss of the dice.
Yeah.
It's like South Park. Who was right?
There's a term for that, isn't there? Where it's like Pascal's wager, I think it's called.
Oh.
Where it's like you might as well believe because if you're wrong, then you're not going to know, and if you're right, if you're right, then you're right, and if you're wrong, then it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's like making bets about the end of the world.
Okay. No, I mean I think that's just it, right? I mean, when you're especially talking about the weight of society, and I think about that all the time.
Yeah.
How do we form our views? If you're being honest with yourself philosophically, you have to realize that like everything is filtered through, no matter how much on the fringe or off the beaten path you think you are, you grew up in a society that's on a beaten path. So, no matter what I want to think, I'm a Irish Catholic. I'm an American. I'm a man. I have, light skin of European descent. I mean, like all those things factor into how I see the world and what experiences I've had. So, that's certainly, that's a factor in like, analyzing anything. I mean, I don't think there's any way in the world to think you're right. I think I'm right for short periods of time, but it's to say concretely that you know the way of the world. It's just perhaps foolish,
Hubristic, perhaps.
Yeah, hubristic, definitely. I mean, we don't know. We have books on kids that died and went to heaven and came back and told us about it. But even that's to some degree taken at face value. I mean, I think it's the greatest roll of the dice we can make is what do you want to do with it? And if it does have meaning, if there's a heaven or hell at the end of it, then, geez, I hope you chose the right way to go. Otherwise, have fun becoming a flower or something. I don't know. Dark.
A bit, but
yeah,
it's all part of the journey. Is kind of figuring things out. So the podcast is called Muddling Through. I don't know if I told you that.
No.
Yeah. So that's kind of like part of the philosophy is just like talking it all out.
Yeah.
And kind of coming to something.
Definitely, we started in a place, but we've ended in a place I couldn't have expected when we started. But
yeah, for sure.
I'm certainly happy with the conversation that's
absolutely
it's ensued.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where to take it from there.
When we talked about the meaning of life, I don't know how much.
It doesn't get deeper.
Yeah, you were like, Mike. So what's the meaning of life? And we did it. We hashed that out a little bit.
Nailed it.
At least, questions with more questions.
Do you have any, like, if you had to recommend some books?
Ooh, yeah, I've got a lot of them, and I've read some of them. I have more books than I've read. That's a fun fact. Because I worked at a used bookstore. I got a lot of them donated for free to me, so I was able to collect quite a bit. But got Infinite Jest was. I mean, that one is it's a doozy. It's I don't mean this pretentiously. It's not for the weak of heart. It's like 1,100 pages, so it takes a bit, and it's a lot of flipping back and forth. But I really, really, really enjoyed that read in terms of going into mental health and drug abuse and those kinds of themes. I thought it was unparalleled there. But let me see what else. In terms of philosophy. God and State is an interesting one that relates to what we've talked about by the Russian author, going back to our Russians, Mikhail Bakunin was he was writing he was writing right around the same time as Karl Marx. Actually, they were sworn enemies at the time on two different sides of the socialist spectrum. He was an anarchist, and Karl Marx was, as we know today, to be a communist. But God and State, it was just an interesting idea, whether or not you take it at face value, but it was the idea that if one were an atheist and didn't necessarily believe in the teachings of God, then that went hand in hand with the idea of a boss or a master or a government. That, in particular, if going the other way, it's the idea that, if you don't accept government as a legitimate authority, then you can accept God as maybe a rational being, rationally present, but that it's another master that you don't necessarily, you can form your own values around.
So you're not obligated to follow your master.
Yeah, it's a look at it. Top-down structure. And the idea, I think it's really a criticism more of the top-down structure of religion, which is sort of what I've come at here is, what it says and what's the essence of it is rarely can rarely be construed as negative towards any human being, but it's when people kind of get powerful with it that things can get a little hairy, and those are the only things that we really tend to argue about. Those are the reasons that anybody's blown up a building in the name of a religion. It comes down to those things. So God and State is just that idea that, the two can be parallel, that the state is a God of its own. And, it's definitely coming out. He's a Russian, Russian Orthodox Christianity was very strong in Tsarist Russia, and then was dismantled completely. Well, or attempted to be dismantled completely during the USSR, the Soviet period. But those are two big ones. Peter Kropotkin is a big one for me. Conquest of Bread or Mutual Aid. Mutual Aid is a really great read. That'll be the last recommendation I'll make. But it's kind of a devil's advocate, if you will, to Charles Darwin.
Okay.
And it's little known, but the idea is that Charles Darwin wrote about why is the specific name of theory slipping my head? Competition of species, survival of the fittest. Thank you, Gordon. Survival of the fittest theory.
I don't know many things, but
competition. Specific to social Darwinism is really what he focused on. So Darwin concluded that evolution is formed through competition, and that the strongest of a species survives because it is the strongest of the species, which makes sense. And that slowly the species will grow to be stronger, and that as time goes on, species evolve because only the strongest survive. That was applied then to social Darwinism, or social structure of humans, that the strongest would survive, and we based our economic systems on that. And what Peter Kropotkin was getting at, he was actually Russian royalty originally, which is fascinating in itself.
Yeah.
But he started to write on the idea that, okay, Darwin, he observed all these animal species working against each other and evolving through that, but then Darwin had discounted several, perhaps even more important animal species that work together, and ignored this whole side of the animal kingdom that survived because of what he called mutual aid, which was not just helping somebody to get something back, but sort of the idea that almost in like the quote unquote karma universe that, by helping somebody, it does end up helping you. He focused on things like, species like ants and that kind of thing, where they are a very, communal existence, and their entire existence depends on that mutual aid.
Yeah.
And that if those species were ever to go into a survival of the fittest ant, the colony would be in bad shape.
Yeah.
And it was really, it's still, perhaps understudied, but, certain anthropologists have looked at it, and it's worth considering. We based a lot of our society on a certain scientist's findings, but there is this other side that's quite logical that makes sense with everything that we've learned now in elementary school about how ants work, or, any sort of colony. So that particular read also is just something that kind of rocked my world in its time.
Right, for sure.
Not that it's not surprising. It's not anything that's terribly challenging to, come to terms with. It's just, I never really thought of it that way.
Yeah. So if you basically say that survival of the fittest is the law of nature.
Sure. Yep.
The laws of nature aren't necessarily moral. Like if we're trying to apply morality, nature is not.
Right. And nature is chaos. Absolutely. And that was sort of that idea, I think, of studying it scientifically. And that's a great point you make. Is that we're always trying as humans, the thinking beings of Earth, that we're doing things that other species, at least as far as we know, have not, in terms of, trying to create the good life. And we've been doing this since ancient times, since before the year zero. But yeah, I think that idea of reasoning with nature, and now at this stage in humanity, where whether we like it or not, even the people that walk the Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine, we as a society are so much further from nature than we were in the year 300 BC. There's no denying that. So I think with that, we're still trying to resolve that sense of the brain being able to control things, but then we can't control nature, and nature is chaos. But looking to nature to say, what kind of meaning can we pull from it? And we look at animals to be these, these greater beings of like, what if we didn't know anything? What would we do?
Like what are the transcendent morals of nature? It's like, well,
yeah. And like,
there aren't really.
No, chimpanzees go to war. We didn't teach them that.
No.
They beat the tar out of each other. They chew each other's faces off. So we can't dismiss the ugly things, the part of a chimpanzee that goes and attacks another chimpanzee's area. The tribalism. Yeah. Or even, just early man, the tribalism there. We didn't necessarily have big border issues, but, let's just go to our own, land continent, North America. Native American tribes had theoretically more than enough space to, coincide, but there's always going to be competition over resources or, whatever's there, even if there isn't true competition. But we're at this weird point where we've kind of figured out how to theoretically cut down on the need for competition for the things we need, food, water, in theory. Yeah. We just haven't quite figured out how to worry about distributing that like we said, in a moral way. Yeah. And I think we do fall back on nature, and we start to question, do we take it at face value that nature is chaos and nature is unfair, and step in as humans and make it as fair as possible? Or do we let the role of nature, play out, and in how we, how much do we step in?
Are you speaking in terms of like letting nature play out on its own, or allowing nature to play out within our society?
I think kind of both. I'm talking about letting human nature play out with the competition. So, in nature, animals starve.
Yeah.
All the time.
Like if the resources are scarce, the ones that the area that can't support the resources is going to reduce the population until
and unfortunately, when we talk about reduction of population, we talk about death. We talk about untimely death, if you will. So, we look at the squirrels here in New Hampshire a couple of years ago. I'm sure it was elsewhere. They overpopulated. Right?
The Great Squirrel Massacre.
The Great Squirrel Massacre. So what happened? A lot of them ran on the road, and unintentionally people ran them over. I can't remember where I was, but I was hearing a woman talking about fight or flight reactions, and how initially, and this was like a teaching conference, she was talking about initially she had a deep reaction to the squirrels running in the road. And within a month, because she felt like it was wrong to hit a squirrel, and within a month, when she had heard that they were overpopulated and they were running on the road because they were starving, she didn't feel guilty anymore. And I found that fascinating. Right. Fascinating that I'm like, well, you're still killing the squirrel. It's a fascinating concept that, like, sort of, okay, given the scientific basis that they all can't survive, that now all of a sudden we feel fine running them over or, wherever it may be. In the case of sport hunting, in some cases, it's like, oh, there are too many deer in this area. So it's my duty to shoot some of them.
Right. Like in Hawaii, I think they're called access deer.
Yep.
That have like severely overpopulated like one of the islands.
Islands have a big problem with that. I know Fire Island down in New York was feeding birth control in the deer food. Not to be mean, they were just like, it's a little island. There's too many deer. Yeah, they eat everything. But there is scarcity. So we look at those scarcities, but we're at a point where we as a society don't just have to, and we don't just accept death, mass death. In that case, it's easy to chalk up Joseph Stalin's reorganization of the Soviet Union, especially through Ukraine, by starving them out. Now, on paper, he said, you're going to grow this much. We need you to grow this much food for the Soviet Union. And that number was impossible. So there was no leftover food for them to eat, and they died. We look at that as a great catastrophe. But, on par with the Holocaust, not necessarily noted like the Holocaust. Right. And the reason it's not noted like the Holocaust is because it does seem natural, I think. The Holocaust people were put on trains, and the Nazi Germans did a lot of experimentation to figure out just how to most efficiently, to put it as well. No, I was going to say to eliminate the population, but yeah, I mean to kill populations they found undesirable. That's exactly what was done there. So we have this power now in the modern, in the 21st century and going forward to potentially eradicate unnecessary intervention of nature. I know it sounds weird, but one of our greatest, we control nature in all kinds of ways. We can't control tornadoes coming. We can't control drought, but if we did have some sort of worldwide system, the way things are, usually these problems aren't hitting all places on Earth. And obviously we can sort of find ourselves in that position in no time. But for right now, it is potentially possible to create enough food and water for at least a better chunk of the human population on Earth to have a go at it. But that said, it's a political problem. It's no longer a production problem. It's a political problem.
Yeah, it's a distribution.
Distribution, but yeah, I mean, we throw out. I'm not trying to get high and mighty. We all throw out food. I don't finish every meal, but if you add up all the food I've scraped into the garbage in a week, or into even compost, I'm sure there's somebody that could have used it.
And the amount of food that we have that just because of the way that our infrastructure is set up, we don't consume everything that's produced.
Oh God, no.
So like you go to the supermarket, you see all the food that's there.
Yeah.
Like it's not purchased quickly enough for it to get used.
Sure.
And
even the stuff that gets bought and then thrown out by the consumer.
Right, exactly. Like there's too much of a lag between, it getting harvested or processed or, whatever, and then shipped.
Yeah.
And then like waiting for someone to purchase it and then being purchased and then
Sure.
waiting to get
The whole
used.
bit, yeah.
Like it's the timeline is drawn out so far that we're producing way more than like a certain demographic needs.
Yeah.
And you know, if we were, I mean, it's all theoretically like, you know, I don't know what kind of infrastructure it would take to do this or like how you would
Sure,
like
yeah,
how you would get everyone on board with it. But
Yeah.
like, you know, if you could diffuse, like, you know, send it out.
Yeah.
Like,
we'll find a system of distribution from there, a way of disseminating it.
right. You could basically eliminate mass hunger.
Yeah, easy.
Like everyone would have enough.
Especially locally. And a lot of that has to do with, you know, the way laws are set up with liability and, a lot of that stuff. I mean, I know restaurants. I mean, I've talked with different restaurants I've even worked at. You know, when food gets thrown out at the end of the night, it's, you know, it's like there are homeless people walking up and down this road all day. You know, how are we not giving it to them? And the truth of the matter is, in the legal system here in America, is if you gave it to somebody and they got sick, they could sue you. So it's actually safer to throw that food out to avoid liability for your restaurant. You know, I don't have the immediate answer there. I obviously get why the legal system allows for you to hold somebody accountable for poisoning you.
Yeah.
Especially if they're being haphazard in it somehow. But I'll never forget. I used to work for a supermarket for quite a while, and there was one particular day where we had a cooler failure for a couple hours.
Yeah.
Electrical failures happen.
Not that long.
And no, not at all. But as soon as the temperatures fell below 40 degrees, as soon as the temperatures went above 40 degrees, which didn't take terribly long, everything had to be thrown out. Now, you could imagine an entire full-size supermarket, everything that's cooled, as soon as it went above a certain temperature, we had to throw it out. I personally threw out enough food to fill the stomachs of a small village, and I'm not saying that lightly, or in any sort of higher political sense. It's just that, you look at it, and I threw enough yogurt to, certainly feed a neighborhood. That was just the yogurt I chucked. So there's no immediate answers, but, we definitely look at surplus that we've created. And the world could be a simple place. And, obviously we've complicated it to our own ends, but there's got to be ways to sit down and simplify some of those problems. And I mean, they're incredibly complex answers, but they're simple conversations to start with.
I think a good starting point would be, I mean, in the first place, like face-to-face conversations more than like internet debates, I think is a
that's incredibly important.
A recurring theme.
Internet debates rarely end in action.
And then the other thing is, we have to come to an agreement on what conversation we're going to have first, and like really, picking a conversation and and holding ourselves to the idea that we're not going to have a different conversation until we're done with this one.
Mm-hmm. That's the toughest part. I mean, everything's interlaced, so it's very hard to not, especially when everybody's got different focuses.
Yeah.
Everybody's got things that are differently important to them, and they're so intersected that I could start agreeing to talk about somebody else's problem, and then all of a sudden it starts to intersect with mine. I'm like, wait, let's do that. I've come across that nonstop and throughout my adulthood, of just agreeing with somebody, but not agreeing where to start. And I think that's one of the biggest menaces to any sort of positive change is the overwhelmingness. And I honestly, dare I go full circle here? I sort of think that that is relative to a generational loss of spirituality with religion. I think, and again, this is purely my own conjecture and thought here, but I think there has been a vast drop in people our age, the millennial generation in empathizing with organized religion. But I think our generation has failed to replace it.
Right.
I think that there's a lot of great, not even defined denominations of Christianity in particular. But, there's all kinds of religions. But I think that a lot of millennials are blindly straying away from religion without thinking about what place religion played in our lives. And the vast development or the quick development of technology, along with the loss of what I'm going to call spirituality with organized religion, has left us devoid of community. And I think that's a huge issue socially for us. And I think that's going to be a defining feature of, where this generation heads is how do we answer those questions of spirituality in this age of information? We can't, we can't survive on just, Siri and Google answers. We know the facts, but we're not connecting dots anymore. And I think that's it, taking a break. We didn't have cell phones in, let's say, the 70s, but shutting it off and going to church for an hour and, having bagels or donuts or rolls or whatever after church. And that sense of community, and, you get sick and you've got those people. A lot of that's gone, and we've tried to replace it with things that just aren't replacements. So, in terms of everything we've talked about here, the meaning of life, the development of Christianity and religion and literature and books, I just think it comes down to, I've been widely interested in trying to find ways to fill those gaps for, people that are seeking social justice, but are burnt out because they don't have any greater connection to something bigger. There's a lot of isolation, depression, all kinds of mental health issues. And, I think a lot of it, not all of it, but I think a good deal of it could be alleviated with the rebuilding of community.
And a lot of that does come from like a shared, so basically
the shared physical space. It's not enough to just join a Facebook group together. It's great, but I as a teacher, I taught high school for very long. I'm in the middle school now. I think that maybe my fear with seeing younger kids is that we've replaced real community with online community, and they're great. But the one thing that's absolutely missing is that you're always going to find somebody that's going to empathize with your ideas, even if they're perhaps, toxic and dangerous. It's fine to have those ideas, but I think there's sometimes a lack of calibration with the internet where you could have the most murderous, sociopathic idea, and when you're talking on a worldwide scale, there's going to be somebody else with an equally sociopathic mind.
Right.
Whereas the old school community was more of a sense, you're more likely to be balanced. The chances of having two complete psychopaths that go to the same church, it could happen. But I think that there's more of a natural balance of human personalities there. That's not to say that social media isn't helpful for people to reach out to each other, but I don't think it can fully replace what was the Sunday church, the synagogue, the temple, or I'm sorry, the mosque. Yeah, exactly. I think that there's something there. The family Sunday dinner. I don't think it has to be quite as traditional, but I don't think our generation has quite found that yet.
Yeah, we've really kind of lost our sense of community. I think the loss of community, and the loss of like shared vision.
Yeah,
because I
think that's it.
If you have a shared vision, you can move forward as a group. And so like you need an overarching narrative for like yourself, your family, your community, like your country. And like if as a country we had a unified like vision for what it should be.
Sure.
and like we all bought into the idea of like this is what we want our country to be.
Yeah.
Like if everyone got on board with it, like it wouldn't even have to be as comprehensive as like all the like nitty gritty details that people quibble over on a daily basis.
Oh,
like,
right.
whatever.
No, that's all. I mean, that's distraction from anything that we really need to be talking about.
But like if we all agreed on like one thing, that could bring everyone together, and like the communities would like really. Loss of community is probably one of the great tragedies of
and I think it's easy to find. I mean, we don't have to compromise as much with the presence of a connection to the better part of the 8 billion people on Earth.
Yeah.
You want to get something done locally. You can't pretend like your little Facebook group is the how the world really is. You have to engage with people of all kinds of backgrounds and views and all. And I think that particularly with kids that have grown up with social media since they were babies, it's almost a scary revelation to see that they're growing up in a world where you can always find that pocket where you'll find a few people to agree with you. So you feel like you don't necessarily ever have to compromise with anybody else. And the reality is the communities are built around people that can actually shake hands, not just, leave each other comments on a page.
Sure.
And
you lose the connection. Like when you're doing online interaction, this is, pretty rough.
People are a lot braver too. Yeah. They say awful stuff on the internet that
they wouldn't dare say to you.
Oh God, no, absolutely not. I think that's right at the essence of it.
And not even necessarily that they wouldn't dare, but they have too much empathy for a human person.
Oh yeah, to see the face.
They wouldn't. Yeah. They wouldn't want to do that to a human being.
Yeah.
And it's like that disconnect. Like even while we're connecting, we're disconnected from like the humanity of the person on the other side.
Yeah, absolutely. And by that same token, it's like, oh, I believe in this, and there's, I'm not trying to just demean social media by any means. There's a lot of positives, but it's very easy to go onto a group that you have subscribed to, with a chat of ideas that you subscribe to, and to fall deeper into that rabbit hole without being challenged on those ideas. And I think that's something that, maybe I got enough of it when I was young to have that idea of challenging myself now. So I'm feeling okay on that front, but I do worry sometimes about what that can do to society or, kids that are growing up with it when you can be completely isolated in your school, have a bunch of friends online. And that's not to say that just because you're not popular in school, you're a flawed human by any means.
Right.
But sometimes socially we can learn certain lessons, if you're the kid flicking boogers on people and nobody wants to talk to you, eventually, you learn the social learning of like, well, if I want to have friends, I don't flick boogers. Mm-hmm. There's something to that, I think, that social conditioning. 100%. That doesn't mean everybody has to conform to it, but there's a certain understanding of how to build community, and wiping your boogers on each other's heads doesn't do it. So,
at least not most communities.
Not most communities, right?
You'll find that
there's a group. That's the problem. There's the Booger Wipers Anonymous, but yeah. And if you like boogers, nothing against you. No change. Yeah, to each their own.
All right, man. Well, we've been going for a little over an hour.
Oh, geez.
Let's wrap this thing up.
Okay.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you for having me.
This has been a great
beautiful
discussion.
Space.
Definitely appreciate that.
Okay, I've never gotten closer to the core of living than here today, Gordon.
Well, I'm glad I was able to facilitate that. I'd like to have you on again at some point.
All right. Cool.
And we'll dig a little deeper.
Yeah, we'll take on the next issues of the world.
The meaning of life.
Part 2.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Muddling Through podcast. If you've enjoyed the podcast and want to support it, consider following the show on social media, subscribing on your platform of choice, and leaving a review where applicable. Thank you, and have a good night.